Hello everyone, this is Michael from Integrating Technology in the Curriculum with our final module. This week we're looking at gamification. So what is gamification? Basically it's the use of game principles like badges, levels, points, things like that for the purposes of learning, skill acquisition, and training. So one of the readings we looked at this week talked about the structure of gamification and sort of these requirements and what it needs to have. And the people, Kane and Pysick, came up with these five basic requirements. So the first one is goals and outcomes. There needs to be some reason to do the game, some bigger picture. Needs to have some rules that govern the game itself. Needs feedback so that the gamer or the student knows how well they're doing. And it needs to be not just at the end but all throughout the game. Voluntary participation. So this is interesting. So basically, they can decide when and where they do the game as opposed to having to do it at a certain specific time. And it needs to have some sort of flow that gets progressively harder as you move up in levels and all of that. So these 4 or 5 ideas are important in the design of the gamification aspects in these learning ideas. The one thing I really like about gamifications is the idea of badges. And these idea of badges, basically, it's sort of giving you some sort of achievement of sorts for completing a task or completing a lesson. And this comes from in video games, you complete these sort of you do some sort of specific thing, like you make it through the level without losing all your lives or something, and you get this badge achievement. Usually it says like achievement unlocked or whatever. And there's a big push to sort of incorporate this in the education world, especially with Mozilla's open badges. So for example, you can get a badge for learning how to do HTML and learning how to do CSS. It's just a way of an idea of basically you collect all these badges. It's sort of the idea behind this to motivate students to learn more. They have something to show for it because this badge represents something. Usually the badges have some sort of standard of what you achieve with it and stuff like that. And the way I want to incorporate badges into my history curriculum, there's sort of 3 types of badges. These things called ELO badges, major specific badges, and knowledge badges. I'm going to go through each one. So the first one, actually, and these badges basically have 2 components. First is the achievement itself, which is the sort of little icon badge thing. And the second is the experience points, and these are like a collection of points that you get with the badge, and I'll explain why that's important in a few minutes. So let's look at the ELO badges first. So these ELO badges, the Essential Learning Outcome badges, are based on the AACNU's value rubrics. There's a big push through Stockton to incorporate these 2 different things. It's basically looking at different competencies for different things. And the nice thing about these are they're cross-discipline, meaning that whether you're taking an English class, a history class, a philosophy class, a psychology class, these badges are going to be the same, and they can be applied to all of those curriculums. So if they want to expand them, it's kind of cool. And most importantly, they're standardized. There's some sort of collective agreement as to what these badges or what these badges would represent and the points you get with them. And again, I said these are based on these competencies from the AACNU, the American Association of Colleges and Universities, sort of LEAP idea. So these competencies have been found to be really important, things like critical thinking, problem solving, written communication. And so each of these would have its own badge, and each of them would have a collection of experience points. And the idea of it, for each assessment you do, you can see, what badges you get, right, and what sort of experience points you get with it. So for example, information literacy, you got a 4. Critical thinking, you only got, what's that, a 2, you know? And so you can see how you did specifically on these different areas for each assessment, but most importantly is you can track them over time. So over the course of the class, the course, you can see, well, how well am I doing in these courses? What do I still need work on? So you can see, for example, written communication, you've gotten progressively better. Critical thinking, you're not doing too well. Inquiry analysis, you kind of stay the same. So you can see a bigger picture of how well you do. I think these kind of idea of the badges, and awarding them is interesting because you can sort of tie it into, basically how well you do, you get the badge, or if you want to just sort of get the badge and then see, how many points you get with it or something like that. I'm not really sure the specific details of how that'll work. I think that needs a lot more look into how well it will work or not, but the idea is kind of cool by applying them to these outcomes. And this same concept would apply for the history, like the major badges too. So in my curriculum, there's that whole list of outcomes that I want people in the curriculum to get. So the badges would be applied to that as well, and the same idea. It gets a little different when you get into the knowledge levels or the knowledge badges of sorts. This is a different kind of concept. I base this kind of on the idea of like video game levels. So the idea is basically chunking your material, so in this case history material, into sort of short manageable sessions. If you're doing it online, you have like the small short 5-10 minute video, text to go along with it, some sort of assessment thing. But you're able to view these levels and see, well, in order to get to level 2, you need to pass through all of these level 1 categories. You can sort of group them into different themes and stuff, and so it turns into more of a visual kind of a view of the course, where you can see sort of a whole map of what you need to do. But more interestingly, I think, is you can sort of see, what areas you've passed with flying colors in, and what areas you still need work on, and sort of to see how by not understanding one concept, how that sort of relates to the other concepts. And so things like that I think is kind of cool to do. And then, like I said before, they can be grouped based on different categories. So for example, these categories here are based on the AP, the Advanced Placement, US History categories of sort of basically themes that run through. So you can group these sort of different levels into this kind of thing, and sort of maybe even give students choices to say, what, you need to do at least 2 based on identity, 2 based on peopling, these sort of core ones. So you give them the options, you give them choices, same like a video game. And so ultimately in these sort of each level, you're going to get sort of knowledge acquisition, which are the content, the people, dates, places, as well as the skill acquisition, which is the essential learning outcomes badges and the major badges. So let's get into the elements of thought. So the purpose of gamification, basically, I think it's to increase student motivation and engagement in the learning. If you think of what makes video games so interesting is sort of capture students' attention, they get them interested, they keep them hooked. And so we're basically trying to take that idea and apply it to learning. Of course, the question is how do we make that happen? How do we apply these gamification principles in a way that is going to make sure learning takes place, keep the interest of students, stuff like that. So the information that was relevant, so obviously the readings, specifically the one by Kane and Pasek, that's how you say it. I also looked up some information on a little bit about basics for game mechanics to get the ideas of levels, achievements, experience points, things like that, turn-by-turn games. Um, I mentioned in the written part of my um, modules response earlier in the week. In one of my classes, we did this simulation of World War I, who started it, where everybody got a country. We had to sort of act like the country in a simulation. We came into the same challenges. We had to see if what worked, what didn't work, get a better understanding. So applying that sort of experience to this was very helpful too. Sort of a turn-by-turn style game, simulation game. My expectations that students will find the learning to be more interesting, and specifically with the badges and outcomes, they have a better picture of how well they're doing, not only in individual assignments, individual classes, but also over the course of their entire sort of career, because they're able to see with the experience points tied in with their badges how well they're doing in these individual areas. But most importantly too is having students more interested in their and more motivated in their learning and engaged in their learning. So concepts. So I think one of the biggest things I took away from these readings is the importance of a well structured class, a well designed gamification, a well designed class or lesson is needed to make these gamification ideas, work very successfully. I think one of the lines said something like you can add these sort of gamification principles, but it doesn't necessarily mean it'll work unless it includes those 5 requirements and things like that. So I think in the ADDIE model, that sort of design and analysis kind of thing is most important, as well as evaluation to understand how it's working, how well it's working. I also, like I said, I looked up stuff about ideas behind game mechanics, which are kind of interesting and I think really important when you do this kind of stuff. So for my assumptions, one, I think that one assumption is that the class will actually want to get into gamification, especially the instructors. And most importantly, is there some sort of infrastructure in place for the gamification, especially the badges. The whole point of badges is you can sort of show them off. So is there going to be that somewhere where people can actually go and see what they've gotten with them? The implications and consequences. So one, I think there's going to be more motivation as a result of this. There's going to be a better understanding both by teachers and students of how well students are doing, and therefore how well instructors are doing because of the use of the experience points and all of that with the badges. And then ultimately we're going to have a consequence of a more engaging educational experience for everybody. And the point of view. So one, are students going to be interested in doing these kind of games? Again, like I said, it has to be sort of tailored to them. It has to be interesting to them. If the whole point of this is to get them engaged and motivated. So if the game itself doesn't do that, then there's no real point of having it involved in it. I think another one too is, are they going to be interested in the badges? Are the badges going to actually motivate them to do these kinds of things? I think the biggest point of view, though, I think it's important, is the professors, because my idea with taking the badges and applying them to these sort of essential learning outcomes and these standardized competency assessment kind of things it's going to require some changes into how instructors teach their courses, how they assess students. Sort of trying to balance for them, maybe potentially having to do more work with, more students. So you want to keep their workload down, make sure they understand the point of this, basically, why it's happening, as well as offering support for, them to make this change and to help create games for their courses and stuff. And I think that's where the administration comes in, is to provide that support, provide the infrastructure in place, make sure there are people who know what they're doing, able to lend a hand and all of that. But ultimately, I think that the idea of gamification, it's really interesting. I don't think that, in all instances, it will work or it will work well. I think a big thing to keep in mind is that, one reason video games are so successful, or games are so successful, is because they are for entertainment and not for learning. So, just because you do exactly what, this bestseller game doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have the same, the same result is going to come out of it. But ultimately, I think it's a really interesting place to, a really interesting thing to include in modern education, and it has a lot of potential. As always, let me know if you have any feedback. Thank you.